Okay, so welcome to another episode of the Michigan Sports Truth Podcast. I'm Taylor Phillips. It is November 16th, 2022. The Lions have won 2 games in a row. They beat the Packers 15-9 2 Sundays ago, and then they beat the Chicago Bears on the road. They finally get their first road win, 31-30, by the way, in what seems to be in what seems a distant memory. That first winning streak for Dan Campbell as a head coach, first road win for Dan Campbell as a head coach, this and that. Proud of him. Yep. They earned him the win. I don't know if it was despite that or for it or with him. But that football game was an epic tilt. There wasn't much defense for most of the game except Jeff Okudah's first career pick six, which tied the game at one point, and then when the Bears had the final possession, Okwaра's sack, I think Julian Okwara, which was one of the factoring steps to clinching the win. The Lions came back from down 2 touchdowns after being gifted the ball back on a phantom face mask call against the Bears defense and used that as momentum to come back. As good as Justin Fields may be advertised for Chicago, and he proved it with a long touchdown run of his own to put the Bears back on top, followed by a very important missed extra point. The Lions defense was shaky as usual until the second half when they stepped up to the task. At times, they're 3-6 now, just a half game ahead of the 3-7 Bears, but a half game behind the Packers, who came back to beat the Dallas Cowboys 31-28 at Lambeau. Green Bay, with their win, is now 4-6. Lions 3-6, Bears 3-7, second place to fourth place in the NFC North. The Lions' remaining schedule doesn't get any easier. They have the New York Giants up next, and the G-Men are 7-2. New York is coming up a 24-16 win at home against the 7-1 Houston Texans. This one for the Lions is in Met Stadium. The Lions also have Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills coming up on Thanksgiving Day next week, Thursday, to Ford Field. Some of their opponents, like the Minnesota Vikings and New York Jets, have hard-earned winning records. They also have losing opponents like the Chicago Bears again, the Carolina Panthers, and the Jacksonville Jaguars, all clearly 3-7. I'm not listing them in particular order. So it's not all super hard for the Lions, but it's still somewhat hard. I still don't think at any rate the Lions have what it takes to make a run for a playoff spot. They're still working out their kinks for next season as far as I'm concerned. Oh, and by the way, one of their wide receivers, DJ Chark, is nearing a return from injury, so they get much needed extra offense back as well. The Pistons, they still can't win games. They're 3-12. Not much else to say about them. Yes, Cade Cunningham has been out for a few games, and now Isaiah Stewart sprained his right big toe and is out 2 to 3 weeks minimum. He'll be reevaluated after 2 to 3. But even when both players played on the court and the team have excelled, the entire team is still not finding their winning ways, especially the lack of defense for most portions of this roster. From most other portions of this roster, such as Killian Hayes, which makes this rebuild of theirs take even longer. We're all aware that Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duren are 2 more bright spots from the draft, except Duren still can't hit free throws, which is irritating if you watch the games for yourself closely. If you watch NBA basketball, you also have Bojan Bogdanovic who can hit threes. This team still has areas of improvement to grow upon. The Red Wings, God, how could the Red Wings lose to the worst team in the NHL going in, the Anaheim Ducks, the way they did last night? The Ducks also had the second worst penalty killing unit going into their overtime victory. That equalizer by Klingberg should have been blocked near the Detroit blue line by Andrew Kopp or whoever. And then Tyler Bertuzzi nonchalantly in the overtime period coughs up the puck and loses it for his team in return. from his injury, which had nothing to do with his inept blunder in front of his own net. For those that stayed up late to watch that whole hockey game like I did, they saw what happened. Even if the Wings got 1 point, this is a game they still should have had, especially against a terrible team. Some of you say that apparently don't even follow the standings. You really don't, and you should. If you want to become a fan of this team, you got to follow your team. You got to know your enemies well. You got to follow the standings. You got to follow everything. You got to be more knowledgeable than that. Not just be a slappy and rah-rah-rah BS. Use your brain. Use your eyes. Talk more sense. At least care. If not, then we don't need you. Sorry. And don't believe that everything Chris Osgood don't believe everything Chris Osgood told you about the Ducks. He was telling you don't underestimate them at the start of the game on Bally Sports Detroit. That he's just trying to scare you. The Wings still should have had that one. They slammed the Ducks 5-1 in their first meeting at Little Caesars Arena. No joke. Yes, the shots were even. Both teams competed. They were up to the task, but mostly for the Ducks, this regular season thus far, that's all I can say about them. The Ducks, they are what their record and stats say they clearly are. For the Red Wing, if you're the Red Wings, you should have had 2 instead of 1. And this they got 1 point crap has to stop. You should have had 2 instead of 1, but instead you're 1 point shy of the Eastern Conference wildcard spots. Shame on you, men. But we didn't expect you to. We still don't expect you to make the playoffs. Didn't expect you to make the playoffs going into the start of the regular season, going into the preseason. Looking at the roster in the past offseason. Moving on, the Michigan Wolverines still remain undefeated after what looked to be an easy win over Nebraska, especially on defense for the Maize and Blue. They have Illinois on Senior Day coming up before heading to the Horseshoe in Columbus next Saturday for the game. The Fighting Illini have a good defense, better than Nebraska. The Illini proved it against the Spartans 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago, rather. Michigan is probably going to miss Donovan Edwards and I think Luke Schoonmaker due to injuries, but Blake Corum, of course, is their main weapon, and they still have Cornelius Johnson and Ronnie Bell, and not to mention Roman Wilson. Their top pass rusher, Mike Morris, is also needed defensively. I have no word on whether he's going to play or not. Hopefully he is. And don't forget the secondary, DJ Turner. They'll need the secondary to step up too. As for the Michigan State Spartans, they're playing catch-up after their win over Rutgers last Saturday in East Lansing. I think they're 5-5. Let me check and see. Michigan State's 5-5. Indiana's 3-7. Yeah, that's their upcoming game. That's at noon on the Big Ten Network. Yeah, and where the heck is? I don't. Well, anyway, as for the Michigan, the rest of the team is trying to finish strong as they play Indiana on Senior Day, and then Penn State on the road. The Spartans men's basketball team almost pulled 2 upsets against two top 5 teams in Gonzaga and Kentucky. The Gonzaga Bulldogs barely held on by 1 point in the Veterans Classic, 64-63, and then the Spartans took advantage of the Kentucky Wildcats coming apart at the seam and won in double overtime 76-68. We all know those thrilling equalizers against Kentucky that both forced 2 overtime periods. But what also factors in as a positive is the sharp shooting from Joey Hauser, who has really stepped up his game. The Spartans are getting better on the court, much better, to my pleasant surprise, as a Spartan fan particularly. If you're a Spartan fan, if I were a Spartan fan. Juwan Howard's Wolverines men's basketball team, on the other hand, have only played opposing schools that aren't nearly as big at least yet, which is the only reason the Maize and Blue are still undefeated in between rims. Finally, the Tigers have hired 3 hitting coaches. Michael Berdar will be their head hitting coach, Keith Beauregard as an additional or assistant hitting coach, and James Rosen as another assistant hitting coach. All 3 have had assistant coaching experience in college, the minors, and the pros. We all don't know how capable they are of coaching this pop gun Tigers hitting squad that had scored one of the least amount of runs in the majors this past regular season. And that's all I have to cover for the Michigan Sports Truth podcast for Wednesday, November 16th, 2022. I'm Taylor Phillips. Follow the Michigan Sports Truth podcast on Twitter and Instagram at Michigan_Truth. Like its Facebook page, subscribe to its YouTube channel at the Michigan Sports Truth podcast, and listen on Spreaker for my special interviews. Special business shout-outs go to Cali Tickets, Creative Embroidery of Cadillac for designing my Michigan Sports Truth podcast logos on these beautiful shirts right here, and United Food Services of Grand Ledge, Michigan, where former DSR member Jim Lyons works. The Michigan Sports Truth podcast is a presentation and production of Phillips Media. TTFN, ta-ta for now. Hit 'em with a hind. Power to the people. I rest my case.